the revolution started, actually, ousted President al-Bashir, he went on TV and he said to the Sudanese people, why are you following the communists? These are all communists. They are non-believers. They're going to take you to hell. And they said, well, we don't care. That's all, just fall. That's all, just fall. That's all, just fall. And that became the slogan for the revolution in Sudan. That's all, just fall. That's all, just fall. And the protesters started adopting the slogans of the Sudanese Communist Party. One of the very famous one was freedom, peace, and justice for Sudan. Freedom, peace, and justice for Sudan. Yeah, that's okay. I would like to start by, thanking our comrades in the Canadian Communist Party. They always stand in solidarity with us, and I congratulate you on your 39th convention. Thank you very much. I usually start my speeches with land acknowledgements as well. I think it's very important in this country. We are all hosting country. I came from Sudan 20 years ago, I got to share the land here with the indigenous people. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwa, the Honduras, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. We stand today in solidarity with the revolution in Sudan. The revolution started in December 2019, and so far more than 100 people actually have fallen in support of the resolution, and they lost their life. So I would like to ask the room to stand for 1 minute in mourning for the people. Thank you. The revolution, the Sudanese Revolution, today actually celebrates a 6-month anniversary of fierce struggle against 3 decades of oppression in the country. In its 43rd day, the historic pro-democracy sit-in protest at the headquarters of the Sudanese Armed Forces has captured the imaginations of the Sudanese people from all walks of life and their aspirations for a new Sudan. The sit-in protest continues to grow stronger and gather more momentum every day. With every critical turn in its development trajectory, the revolution continued to gain new grounds and deepens the sense of solidarity and struggle among the forces of the revolution and those who are fighting for freedom, peace, and justice in Sudan. I'm not sure how many of you have seen, the side or the stage side of the sit-in protest in the military headquarters in Sudan, but I really invite you, if you haven't seen it actually, just go to Facebook or Google it. It's amazing. The protesters, they converted that area that used to be occupied by the military headquarters into a really creative space where a number of people like artists, activists, people from the different parties in Sudan and the different forces of the revolution they turn it into a public square. There is art, there are speeches, there are basically circles for basically spreading the awareness around the revolution. It's amazing what's happening there. So I'm here today to actually give you an update on what's going on in Sudan. The revolution still continues. The military council, who basically took over power from President Bashir, it's in negotiations with the Alliance of Change and Freedom. That's the alliance that's basically representing the revolution in Sudan right now, and it's negotiating in behalf of the people. So I'm gonna just go through the latest development. So on May 13th, a group of unidentified militia suspected of being related to counter-revolutionary groups, including the ousted National Congress Party and its feared National Intelligence and Security Services, attacked the unarmed protesters near the main sit-in protest area and committed a massacre, killing more than 20 people, including soldiers from the Sudanese Armed Forces, according to The Guardian. And we all know with every revolution, there is actually a counter-revolution, and that's what's happening right now, because the revolution is prevailing in Sudan, and the only thing that the dark forces that's against the revolution can do is just instigate more violence right now, trying to basically create more problems for the negotiations and the talks. 2 days later, on May 15th, several other groups of unidentified militias instigated even more violence and disruptions in several locations close to the sit-in protest area, where protesters gathered and barricaded themselves. According to the BBC, the militia opened fire, killing at least 5 more protesters and 1 member of the security forces. According to the Sudanese Physicians Associations, the numbers of injured protesters and civilians are also significant, with more than 60 people treated for gunshot wounds in clinics across the capital. The latest incidents happened amid a deal that was highly anticipated between the military council and who took the power from the Bashir and the Alliance for Freedom and Change, who has been leading the revolution. Following the incidents, on May 16, General Burhan, who is the head of the military council, announced that the talks between the military council and the Alliance for Freedom and Change were suspended for 72 hours. This decision came as a surprise, as significant progress was made in the talks after weeks of disagreements between the Alliance for Freedom and Change and the military council regarding the arrangements for a transition of power to a civilian-led transitional government. And this is basically the demands of the protesters and the demands of the people who are in the sit-in protest area. There is no compromise. It's either a full civilian-led government or that's it, that's all, just fall. So basically, they were very close to reaching the agreement. The agreement, if implemented, would give the Alliance for Freedom and Change exclusive authority in a 3-year transitional period before a general election in the country. During this period, the Alliance for Freedom and Change will form a transitional cabinet and hold a majority of seats in a transitional parliament and install a presidential council with no executive power and only symbolic representation from the army. The civilian members will hold the majority of the presidential council seats. It's basically just a compromise to keep the military junta, I guess, happy or feel still proud that, you know, they are just in the council. But the agreement reached a point where that presidential council will have no executive power. The agreement also included a joint committee to oversee an immediate investigation into the massacres of May 13th and all the violence by state forces that resulted in over 100 protesters being killed over the past 6 months. The military council used the issue of roadblocks and barricades as an excuse to suspend the talks until roadblocks and barricades that don't fall within the sitting area are removed. So I'm not really sure how people are supposed to, I guess, resist non-violently if they can block roads. However, Burhan accused the protesters of provoking and insulting the armed forces, disrupting life inside the capital by blocking the roads and bridges and allowing armed elements into the sitting protest area. The military completely ignored the fact that the protesters increased the roadblocks and barricades and escalated their protests and demonstrations in response to the deliberate actions by the military council to sabotage the negotiations. The military council attempted to include in the talks the counter-revolutionary forces in an attempt to sabotage the negotiation, represented by the Popular Congress Party, which is a sister party of al-Bashir's National Congress Party, and among many other parties who were supporting the previous regime, claiming that the Alliance for Freedom and Change doesn't represent all the forces that contributed to the revolution. So basically, since then, counter-revolutionary groups, so basically, this tactic was faced with firm actions in terms of escalation in demonstrations and sit-in protests in several cities in the country, while the Alliance for Freedom and Change refused to enter any negotiations that include parties that were part of the ousted regime of al-Bashir. Since then, counter-revolutionary groups are trying to find ways to block the negotiations, derail the process, and reverse the clock on the revolution. The talks are planned to resume tomorrow. However, the situation is very volatile at the moment, with reports of splintering among the military and security units, all concerned about their loss of power and financial autonomy in a civilian-led transition. On the evening of the May 13 massacre, the shooting went on until midnight without any intervention from the military. This is a serious sign that shows the inability of the military council to prevent such attacks and challenge their authority and willingness to hand power to civilian-led government. Furthermore, we all know that the road to a civilian-led transition is paved with a bewildering array of obstacles that will get harder and more difficult to reconcile as the transition moves on. The agreement, if signed between the two parties, will dictate that for the next 6 months will be dominated by negotiations between the transitional authority and the armed opposition groups, such as the Sudan Liberation Movement, Justice and Equality Movement, and the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, the North Branch. These are all armed factions, which one of them is actually led by Yasser Arman, a Sudanese presidential hopeful during the rigged elections of 2010. Lieutenant General Kabashi is the spokesman of the military council, admitted that the dismantling of the old regime could take decades, suggesting a project well beyond the planned transition, and raises questions about the good faith of the military, many of whose senior officers were direct beneficiaries of the Islamist deep state in Sudan. So now, what's the position of the Sudanese Communist Party? After the suspension of the talks, the party held a conference and issued a statement. And Comrade Al-Khatib, who is the political secretary of the Sudanese Communist Party, presented the party's position on the current development. He stressed that the current revolution is continuation of the struggles of the Sudanese people since independence for national and social liberation, for democracy, social justice, and peace. He pointed out that the main aim of the revolution is to achieve radical solutions to burning issues facing the Sudanese people since independence. On the massacre of the May 13th, the Sudanese Communist Party stated that the military council bears full responsibility for the criminal attacks since it's the real beneficiary of ending the sit-in protest. The party demanded a joint committee inquiry with full judiciary power to bring those responsible for the massacre to justice. Furthermore, it called for the detention of the top brass of al-Bashir's regime. The political secretary of the Sudanese party also demanded the handover of al-Bashir. Can you believe it? Al-Bashir is still not actually in prison. And all those accused of committing war crimes to the International Criminal Court. He went on to state that the President Military Council is actually the security committee established by al-Bashir, but they were faced to act sacrificing al-Bashir in a vain attempt to abort the revolution and save the regime. Furthermore, the Military Council is trying to preserve the old policies, continues to be lenient with those who committed crimes against the people, and is trying to reach agreement with the forces supported al-Bashir. On the talks between the Alliance of Change and Freedom and the Military Council, Comrade Al-Khatib appreciated the limited progress achieved, but it started that the party leadership is studying and evaluating the results. It's important to note here that the party is actually a founding member of the Alliance for Change and Freedom. However, he made it clear that the Sudanese Communist Party is against the idea that a military figure be appointed as head of the Presidential Council, as well as giving the military a majority in the council. The Sudanese Communist Party position is that real power is transferred to the civilian government, then a major step forward is achieved. Otherwise, the revolution will continue, preparing for launching a general political strike and full civil disobedience in solidarity. That's all just for. Thank you very much.